The story of human history, evolution, migration, and use of technology is a story that is missing many chapters. We believe we have fashioned a fairly accurate account of where we began, how we migrated across this planet, and at what point in time achieved profound technological advances. But this historical account is also full of questions and illogical pieces of evidence. To this day, we still do not know how ancient Egyptian and Mayan pyramids were built, and on occasion, an archaeological site like Göbekli Tepe, a temple complex built roughly 12,000 years ago in Turkey, leaves us baffled and forces us to reconsider the nature and timeline of our existence. But based on the majority of evidence available, we can surmise that, up until around 6,000 years ago, most humans were primarily hunter-gatherers, nomads that followed favorable climate and food source to stay alive. We do not have written records that predate this time, so we must rely on archaeological evidence and oral history, which for the most part support the hunter-gatherer theory. However, if we focus our attention to a moment roughly 6,000 years ago, in the Sumerian region of Mesopotamia, we realize that something truly profound happened in the course of human events. Almost instantaneously, mankind created the world's first written language, the first wheeled and axled vehicle, the first loom to weave fabric, the first pyramidal structure, and incredibly, a 60-based math system that we still use today. This elegant mathematical system is not only the foundation of geometry, it also provides the mechanics for how we measure the surface of our planet, frequency waves, even the passage of time. It is worth noting here that this Sumerian counting system, based on 12s and 60s, seems like an unlikely and counterintuitive invention. One must assume that since we have 10 fingers on our hands, humanity's earliest mathematics would have been based on 10, but this is not the case. For some reason, ancient Sumerians were guided to calculate by functions of 12 and 60, and it is this math that gives us 360 degrees to a circle, 60 seconds to a minute, 12 inches to a foot. So how, and more importantly, why was this particular system implemented? We can speculate and come up with numerous theories, or we can consider what the ancient Sumerians themselves wrote about this incredible moment in the advancement of human knowledge. Though it is not what historians want to hear, the Sumerians recorded in clay tablets that they did not invent base 60 mathematics, but were provided this knowledge by beings not of this earth. They describe, in great detail, visitors who, depending on interpretation of the texts, either came from the sky or were the kin of royalty who descended from the heavens. Archaeologists suggest that these are fanciful accounts, but to the Sumerians, these visitors were not mythical gods. They were abnormally tall, human-like beings who lived amongst the people of the day and shared a wealth of knowledge with them. Known as the Anunnaki, this race of giants is reported to have lived with our ancestors for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. Interestingly, in the book of Numbers in the Bible, there is an account of Moses sending scouts ahead to investigate the land of Canaan, which they were about to inhabit. When the men came back, they reported that the giant race of the Anak were still living amongst the people there, and were so big that mere humans looked like grasshoppers in comparison. Were we really contacted by beings not of this world all those years ago? And if so, what was the true purpose of their visit? In an attempt to answer these questions, we must first step into the open field of speculation, then see, based on other evidence that presents itself during our search, if any of this sky visitor theory supports itself in other ways. In essence, what we will be looking for are coincidental clues that, taken in historical context, will either support or renounce the earliest records ever written. In the first sonic geometry video, we were introduced to the notion that Sumerian-based geometry could be represented as audio frequencies, that if you played the sum-angle total of virtually any combination of basic geometric shapes, from the 180s of triangles to the 540s of pentagons to the 2160s of cubes, you would get various arrangements of a numerically perfect major chord revealed by a factor 9 grid, which in turn is built upon a tone vibrating at 432 cycles per second. It should be noted that this key tone used to tune instruments has drifted up and down over the centuries, and that 440 cycles is the current international standard. Does this matter? For musical purposes, it could be argued that any tuning system is as good as the next, just so long as every instrument is tuned to the same tone. But since all life can be expressed as energy held together by frequency and vibration, maybe we should be looking deeper at the numerical information revealed by the Factor 9 grid. It is interesting that when tuning is anything other than 432, the corresponding grid does not produce any intriguing numerical sequences. But when we revert to 432, and if we move up and down strictly by multiples of 9, an astonishing 14-tone matrix of synchronicity begins to appear. For instance, on this unique grid, we find not just some, but all of the numbers representing every primary geometric shape. Looking deeper, we see many other numbers that have played into some of humanity's most profound religious texts. The 72 names of God in the Kabbalah. There is 108, the number of times mantras and mudras have been repeated in Hindu ceremonies. We find 144, a number sequence represented in the Great Pyramid of Giza, the number of days in a Mayan Baktun, or even the 144,000 chosen ones described in the biblical book of Revelation. And of course there is 432 itself, the number mythologist Joseph Campbell encountered so many times in his cultural studies that he called it the most important mythological number in history. Standing back from this Factor 9 matrix, we have to ask ourselves, how could the 432 grid not be important when it reveals so many numeric coincidences? Once again, logic stands in the way of us seeing a bigger picture. Seemingly, because any arbitrary unit of time could be used to measure vibration cycles, none should be considered any more or less correct than the other. We measure sound waves by the Sumerian second, of which there are 86,400 in a day, but we could just as easily have chosen some other span of time. And so what if the Factor 9 grid reveals the numerical value of geometric shapes, the 1440 minutes in a day, the diameters of the moon and sun, and speed of light in miles? If these are all invented arbitrary measurements, a person could logically argue that these coincidental number sequences are nothing more than hand-selected data gathered to support a predetermined theory. And so we must search further. We must look for something completely non-arbitrary, a natural order or pattern of some kind that might serve to bind all this information together. But what might that be? And if it's here on this planet, why haven't we already found it? Maybe perspective has been our problem. What if the answer isn't on this planet, but is the planet itself? After all, the Earth does move in ways that reveal observable patterns. It spins at a rate we call a day, and orbits the Sun in a period known as a year. But were you aware of our globe's largest cycle? It is an extremely slow wobble that takes 25,920 years to complete. Known as the precession of the equinox, this unique phenomenon is the largest and slowest movement Earth makes. Much as we do today when we observe celestial objects, does it not stand to reason that an intelligence possessing a distant view of Earth would be aware of its signature wobble? And if this is true, might not it also be possible that this same intelligence would provide us with some kind of device, a mathematical system perhaps, that would not only offer us hints of their existence, but also of their knowledge about our planet? Let's return to the Factor 9 grid. Stepping back to expand our view, we take note of these numbers with a new way of seeing. And now, with the deeper understanding of the precession of the equinox, we begin to compute. Starting with the fundamental 12s and 60s of Sumerian math, we then experiment with the geometric and sacred text number sequences revealed in the 432 matrix. 12 times 2160, 60 times 432, 360 times 72, 180 times 144. The answer to all these equations, 25,920. Like gears turning in a precisely machined clock, we see that every single one of these numbers fits perfectly into 25,920 without remainder. And what we now must realize is that we are no longer talking about an arbitrary math system, but one that can be cross-checked by a completely non-arbitrary thing, the physical wobble of our planet. What's more, we need to keep in mind that this system was implemented long before our ancestors could possibly know what it would reveal, and shared in the only way it could be shared, not by corruptible stories and myths, but in the pure realm of mathematics. In essence, it would seem that we have been catching up to significant information contained in 1260 math, slowly coming to realize that a message of sorts has been making its way across the cosmos into our collective consciousness for thousands of years. And just what is this message? In a word, it is harmony. When we play together as frequencies the numbers of all the primary geometric shapes, what presents itself is a three-tone, numerically perfect major chord. This phenomenon should not be taken lightly, for what we are seeing is a certain kind of proof that nature, as revealed by mathematical patterns, is a force existing in literal harmony with itself. To further see how harmonics are represented in the workings of creation, consider the Fibonacci sequence, which was first shared with the Western world by Leonardo Fibonacci in 1202. This numerical sequence has been found to represent the spiraling growth pattern of many organic shapes, from seashells to entire galaxies, and so represents one of the most important mathematical algorithms ever discovered. If you are at all familiar with this sequence, you know that it starts from 0, moves forward by 1, then continues by adding the previous 2 digits to arrive at the next in the sequence. So when we take our first two numbers, 0 and 1, and add them together, the sum is still 1. From here, the sequence begins its journey. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8, and so on into infinity. Now, if we were to apply frequencies to this sequence, we would not get audible tones, as single-digit vibrations per second cannot be heard by the human ear. Instead, let's start the Fibonacci series with an audible sound wave. In this case, we will use the numeric value of a simple geometric shape, the triangle. With an angle sum total of 180, this is what a triangle sounds like. Now let's begin again, this time taking note of both the number and tone it represents. We start at 180, and of course 0 plus 180 gives us another 180. Next is 180 plus 180, 360, an octave above the first tone, and also the number representing the sum total of a circle or a square. And here is when things get really interesting. Add 360 to the 180 before it, and you get 540. The sum total of a pentagon, and also a perfect harmonic fifth of our first tone. Then 540 plus 360, and the total is 900. A septagon, and the major third required to build a geometrically perfect major chord once again. Moving one step higher, you get 1440, represented in geometry as a star tetrahedron, or the shape known in ancient Jewish texts as a Merkaba, and which provides another octave of our first tone. Amazingly, when you apply the Fibonacci sequence to vibration cycles, the first 6 digits will always represent a numerically perfect major chord, implying that harmony, in the most literal way possible, is what anchors every Fibonacci series. And once again, we must acknowledge that we are not dealing with an arbitrary, man-made system to reveal these harmonics. Rather, this is yet another example of nature, through number sequences, revealing the harmonic essence of life to mankind. To see how the Fibonacci sequence reveals a spiral, as well as a significant mathematical constant known as the golden ratio, we will need to think spatially. Let's start with a square, but rather than a single square with a volume of 1, we will once again assign a sonic frequency to this shape. In this case, we will choose 144. 0 plus 144 is of course another 144. Then adding these two numbers together, we get 288, or a higher octave of the first tone. Moving on, 144 plus 288 reveals our mysterious 432. Then 288 plus 432 equals 720, or the sum total of a tetrahedron, before arriving at our sixth square and frequency of 1152, a higher octave of the first tone. As you can see, the combined length of any two previous squares informs how big the next